Hello, I'm Brandon from XEROProducts, and today I'm going to talk to you about the XERO Pure ATOM system. This here is our smallest system on a cart. Now, our ATOM system features two 20-inch RO membranes with a 10-inch carbon filter and a 10-inch DI. So we're going to talk all about our smallest little robust system. All right, so we have our ATOM system here in the box. We're going to go ahead and unbox the system, see what comes with it, and take a closer look at what we have here. So let's go ahead and open up the box. All right, so first and foremost, take out our foam. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and take this system out. Now the ATOM is small, so while it may have a little weight to it, it's not too difficult to remove yourself, simply by lifting by the handles on the bottom and top of the system. Carefully remove our foam. It's good to make sure you don't get any extra foam particles into your inlet. And here we have our ATOM. Modern day ATOM systems are built with blue hose. So you might see blue hose on the newer ones. If you have an older system, you might have black hose. Other than that, systems remained relatively the same throughout the years. All right, so we have our ATOM outside of the box here. Now, this system, like I said, is our smallest system on a cart. Stands at a staggering 3.5 feet high, featuring two 20-inch RO membranes, a 10-inch carbon filter, and a 10-inch DI. Now, let me ask you this. Why buy such a small system? Well, you may be a window cleaner that, like me, I love hatchbacks. And you might operate out of a hatchback. You may not necessarily need a big system. Lucky for you, the ATOM is capable of putting up to about a gallon per minute, depending on your source conditions, which is comparable to a XERO Pure, while also maintaining a compact size. So this can fit in the trunk of your sedan, fit in the back of my Volvo. So this is ideal for that window cleaner that you need your pure water without the big size. So I have our system laying down here, and I'm just going to show you a closer look at this system here. So first of all, you have your inlet side, much like a XERO Pure, in through your 10-inch carbon filter, which then feeds two 20-inch RO membranes. Now these 20-inch RO membranes have two flow restrictors at the bottom to help create back pressure for optimal flow and purification. That's your salt rejection. That's your salt rejection here. And then you have your pure water from your ROs leading to your DI housing here for that extra polish. And then on the opposite side of your system is the outlet. So it's very much like a compact max system, if you will, with two different ROs, a carbon filter, and a DI, just smushed down to a small frame. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the accessory bundle that comes with your ATOM system. So I'll go ahead and open up the bag. Make sure you check your box for it. So now we have our filter wrenches, a small wrench and a large wrench. Now these wrenches are intended to fit onto your filter housings, respective to their size. Small one for your carbon filter, large one for your DI. And this allows you to be able to remove the housings for filter changes. Next, we have our TDS meter. Now, this meter is an important tool for understanding how hard or soft your water is, meaning how much minerals and solids are in the water that you are going to measure how your system is removing them from the water. So this tool is important to understand your TDS, your total dissolved solids. This measurement will help you understand the health of your filters and the health of your system. Next, we have our Magic Lube. Now, Magic Lube is a pretty important tool. It's a silicone lube that is intended for lubrication of any of your O-ring seals or gaskets on this system, whether it's the filters for your DI cartridge, the O-rings that keep your RO caps nice and sturdy and secure, or perhaps the O-ring to the housing of your DI that creates a seal between the cap and the housing. Make sure you utilize your Magic Lube for lubricating your O-rings for a more secured seal. So next, we have our RO Guardian. Now, this powder here is intended to help preserve and store your membranes for long-term storage. So this powder here helps prevent any microbial growth that may occur from longer periods of storage, and it can also be mixed with antifreeze for winter storage. That way your housings are winterized and they won't crack. It's basically allowing them to pickle. Now, the ATOM system, while it has two 20-inch RO membranes, each membrane will use half of this packet for your application. So ATOM systems will come with one RO Guardian packet. So bear that in mind, half packet per membrane. So this is your waste hose. Now the ATOM has two flow restrictors at the bottoms of the membranes. It's a silver garden hose looking piece here that you can screw in both ends here of your waste hose. Now this will allow the wastewater from your membranes to travel in a single stream and simply flow away from the system. It's just salt rejection water. But you'll hook up your waste hose to the bottom of your system here, just like any other XERO system. Last, but importantly not least, we have the manual. Now this user manual will allow you to get familiar with your system, allow you to get familiar with any sort of parts that may need replacement. It also allows you to understand the warranty policy, as well as little information about setup and storage. So it's an important tool. Make sure you look over the XERO manual to understand your system much better. Now that being said, we're going to go ahead and take an even closer look at the ATOM. So we're going to talk a little bit today about easy ways to swap components from your ATOM system to either a new frame or configuration that we might have sent you due to a warranty claim. First and foremost, we're going to go ahead and remove our filters so we have a lot more access to the system. Now remember, with these filters, it's the opposite of what you may think from loosening and tightening. Now, if you want to loosen the housing, notice I'm behind the system and I'm pulling towards myself. But I am currently going clockwise. By doing so, the housing has come loose. And we're just gonna pop that off real quick. We have our DI filter. We'll put that to the side. Same with the carbon filter. A little better example here. So I'm behind the system, same as the bottom, towards myself. You don't have to do it that hard. And now, the filter housings have been removed, allowing more access to the system. Now we are going to go ahead and lay this down. And now, we may have sent you a blank frame with wheels as a replacement due to a warranty claim. And you may try to figure out how can I move everything over without taking so much apart? You'll notice that all the hardware is in between both of the ROs here attached to the center of the frame. So before we touch any of that hardware, we're going to disconnect the hoses. We don't want to deal with any extra resistance, so we're going to pop out our hoses, simply pull on the blue end of the push fit, and then pull on the opposite end of the hose. See? My hands are a little sweaty, but there they go. So now we have our hoses disconnected. I personally recommend having a drill on hand. You can do this by hand. Obviously, it is more labor intensive and will take more time. But with a drill, all you'll need is a size 11 millimeter bit for any of the hardware that attaches to the frame. And you will also need an 11 millimeter wrench for the opposite side of the bolt. So we're going to go ahead and start with the DI housing. Now you'll notice the DI housing and the hardware for the RO housings share the same holes. So bear in mind, when you are loosening, you are actually taking two things off at once. Or three. All right, so we're going to loosen. And by doing so, you'll see now the DI housing will exit the frame. And there we go. We didn't have to remove the cap from the bracket. We're just going to put that to the side. Next, I'm going to go ahead and take out the two center bolts that also share with the RO brackets. So we're doing the RO brackets, but killing two birds with one stone. Oops. There we go. So now you'll notice with those four bolts removed, both the ROs and the DI have been removed. So there's our RO housings. We're going to put this to the side. And the last thing that's left is our pre-filter bracket, simply attached with one bolt. You'll loosen as such, and now you're left with a blank frame. At that point, we'll consider this our new frame. Simply reattach everything through the same hole pattern as we took it out from. Excuse me. So, as simple, we'll start with the pre-filter housing. And notice, we took apart this system in three different major components. Pre-filter housing, the DI housing, and the RO bracket assembly that we put to the side. So we have our new frame, pre-filter brackets on. Start with the pre-filter bracket, and you're gonna take your RO assembly. Now, depending on when the system was manufactured, there are slight minor differences in the frames as far as hole patterns go. It may require a slight bit of adjustment to fit the hole pattern of your frame naturally. So I'm going to show you how to work around that. First of all, we're going to align our holes the best we can before doing anything. Now next, we're going to take the bolt that goes through the center here. You want to make sure it is the longer of the two bolts that you've taken out. You'll notice one is slightly smaller and it won't reach through both of the brackets. So bear that in mind when reinstalling. And now we have a bottom hole of the RO bracket here. That'll take that smaller bolt. Make sure you put your washer and nut on the top. Everything's just hand tight right now. Now, at this point, if you find that you're having difficulty in getting your holes to line up, this is where you can loosen the straps that hold your RO housings together. That'll allow some play here that you'll be able to adjust this bracket and how it sits with the frame while maintaining its connection to the RO housings here. So if your holes don't exactly line up with the frame itself, you can loosen the bolts that hold your RO straps here. They are size 13 millimeter, and that'll allow you to slide this bracket up and down these housings, allowing you to find the proper holes that will allow you to attach the bracket. So here we have a good alignment here. So once you've aligned those holes, you're going to go ahead and take your DI housing. Notice your bolts are nice and secure. Then you're going to share the holes of your RO bracket here. So I'm going to go ahead and attach here. And we're going to take our washer and our nuts and attach them as such. Okay. So now that we have our 3 different major components reattached, it's as simple as tightening your hardware, reattaching your hoses, and reattaching your filters. Now, I recommend, before tightening down the hardware, start with the hoses. You have the most flexibility to be able to get a proper seal in your push fit. So now that we're all hooked up, let us secure the brackets, and we are good to go. And there we have it, folks. All you have to do, reattach your filters to the housings, and we're back in business. All right, so we have our Atom system here. We're gonna go ahead and get things hooked up for our first initial setup. And we're gonna talk about all of the steps involved when first getting started with your pure water system. So, much like every other XERO system, you have your inlet side on the carbon filter side here. As I say, inny, spinny. So we're gonna go ahead and hook up our inlet hose. For example's sake, I have a water test hose here, but you'll want to make sure that you're utilizing the right kind of hose to supply water to your system. So when you're going to set up, you want to make sure that you have a standard garden hose with a minimum inner diameter of 5/8 or 3/4 inch. That way you'll have an appropriate amount of volume without any restriction to allow water to fill up your system and purify properly. So make sure you're paying attention to what kind of inlet hose you're using when setting up. So now, at the bottom of the system here, we have our waste outlets. Now I have the waste hose hooked up to both of these outlets. These are restrictor fittings that allow back pressure to allow the membranes to properly perform, purify, and have adequate flow. So we have that hooked up, and I have that going to the bin here for now. That's just rejected salts. Remember that. Now next, with this little green hose, this is going to represent the outlet to the system. As shown here, it's a garden hose male fitting here. This would be your output to your water-fed pole. At this point, you could utilize a 3/8 inner diameter hose if you would like to supply water to your water-fed pole. But anyway, this is where the pure water will exit your system. So now that we have our hoses hooked up, which are inlet, outlet, and waste, we're ready to start putting water into this system. So if this is your first time running water into it, go ahead and simply open up your source spigot, whether it's a garden hose, whether it's a sink. Let's go. So now you're going to notice that your wastewater fitting is going to start sputtering. This is air that is trapped in your RO membranes, in your hoses, any little nook or cranny in here that has air. It's going to sputter out of your waste hose first. And you're going to notice water will exit here before you get any water out of your system. This is your membranes that are currently taking water from your carbon filter, forcing the pure water through the center while rejecting the salts and minerals that will come out of your waste fittings here. And now your salt rejection has left the system. And now, just about now, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead so you guys can see. I'm gonna get a little wet here. Don't worry. All right, and here's our pure water. As simple as that. So it'll take a couple minutes, but as water is traveling through the inlet of the system, it'll work through the carbon filter, in through the ROs, salt rejection out through the bottom, while the pure water meets your DI housing here. Your 10-inch resin will polish off the last remaining TDS, resulting in your pure water. So it's as simple as that. Now, since this may be your first time running water into your system, I will say, upon initial setup, you'll want to make sure that these membranes have water running through them for at least 10 minutes. Why? Because you're going to want water to force through this fiberglass sort of sponge and allow it to soak in water through every crevice. This basically gets it primed for optimal performance. The reason you want to saturate your membranes is if you imagine these membranes like a dish sponge, a sponge that you're going to use to clean your dishes. Now, what happens when you don't use your sponge for a while or ever? It's dry. If you take that, slap some water on it, and take some soap, right off the bat, it's not necessarily going to clean efficiently. You know, it's got to work its way in. You need the water to saturate it. Well, membranes are kind of like that from an efficiency standpoint. So when you're first running water into your system, do it for 10 minutes. Allow all the air to escape from the system. And at the same token, I highly recommend disconnect the supply line to your DI. Why? That way you're not prematurely using any resin while you're not trying to purify water, you're trying to saturate. So for efficient flow and purification, and to get the best out of your system, saturate your membranes. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and talk about how to maintain your system as well as storing your system. So from a maintenance perspective, I should note that these systems are not designed for winter use. Meaning, if you live in a region where your winter months are cold, you may have freezing temperatures at night, at that point you want to be strategic in how you store your system. Because bear in mind, it's not designed to freeze. You have fiberglass membranes inside a stainless steel housing that are reactive to temperature. So imagine when you have freezing temperatures and water trapped inside a very, for lack of a better word, fragile construction. Well, as temperatures freeze, it's going to cause constriction. and that constriction can cause cracking. And that cracking is going to cause your membranes to not properly purify, as well as strange flow issues you may have as well. So when it comes to wintertime, you want to make sure that you utilize the RO Guardian that comes with your system. Now, the RO Guardian is designed to help maintain and store your membranes for periods of non-usage. Now, I would say, what is a period of non-usage? Is it a couple days? Is it a week? I personally recommend, if it's going to sit for longer than 2 to 3 weeks, it's important to protect your membranes from any microbial growth that can occur from periods of sitting. Just remember, at the same token, inside these housings is trapped water. That is stagnant water that is not going anywhere, which is a breeding ground for microbial bacteria, which create biofilms. And those biofilms will stop flow and proper purification through the membrane housing. So it's important to understand the importance of RO Guardian. There's a QR code on the bag provided with your system here. It's important to scan and get familiar with this. Now, as far as where to store it, on the subject of freezing temperatures, I don't recommend storing your system inside a van that is parked outside that may be susceptible to freezing temperatures. Unless you properly insulate your van, you're still running the risk of these housings freezing, which may also cause damage to your DI or carbon filter housings. They may crack and explode from pressure. So, if it's stored in your van, maybe if you have a heated garage, that might be a better option for storing your system. If you do have to store it in your van, make sure you pick a strategic spot inside. Maybe keep it away from the walls. Obviously, utilize your RO Guardian at that point, but understand you're running the risk of any damage to your system. You want to protect it at all costs. That being said, we're going to talk about maintaining your system and how to change all the filters that are involved in the Atom. So we're going to talk about TDS issues that you may come across when using your Atom system or any pure water system at that point. Now, TDS is total dissolved solids, meaning how much of the stuff is being taken out of the water through the filtration. So understanding TDS is understanding your system and understanding how it's functioning. So, first and foremost, how do we troubleshoot a TDS issue? By understanding how TDS behaves with the filters of your system, it'll allow you to understand what needs to be changed, because 99% of all TDS issues are just a filter that just needs to be changed. So, first of all, let's figure out what our source TDS is, and then compare it to the rest of our filtration here. So, we have everything hooked up. I'm gonna run water. All right, so we have water running through. Our wastewater's coming out. And now we're gonna measure what our TDS from our source is. So this is where the TDS meter is gonna come in handy. Now, we're gonna measure our incoming TDS. All right, it's relatively low here. We have 73 ppm, or 73 parts per million. Now, we're gonna see how our ROs are performing. Your carbon filter is not really gonna take out TDS. I mean, it's going to take out sediments and everything, but you're really gonna wanna measure how efficient your membranes are at purifying. So we're gonna go ahead and measure the incoming TDS to the resin chamber. Now what I can do, I'm going to shut off the water temporarily, because you could do this from 1 or 2 points. You could disconnect the hose feeding your DI. Just note, if you just ran water as I did, you might get a little wet. All right, so now we're just gonna see what both of the membranes are doing. Oh, let me just hook that back up. Okay. All right, from 72 to about 11, 12. All right, so that's about the kind of rejection that we're expecting. Now, RO membranes can take out 95 to 99% of solids. Depends on what kind of solids are in your water, but we're getting about 80 to 85 right now. It's pretty good, pretty good. Mind you, I was only running it for a little bit, so we had 11 ppm feeding our resin chamber, and now we're going to measure the output of our system here. Whoops. Now look at that, 0 ppm. So by measuring our incoming TDS, the TDS that our ROs are producing, and the TDS out of the resin chamber, now we know how different parts of the system are taking out those solids from the water. How much stuff is being taken out. Now, this system is functioning properly. We were able to get 0 ppm. So now, let's diagnose a hypothetical scenario. Help us get in the mindset of troubleshooting TDS. So now let's say that our incoming source, we measure it, it's 150 TDS. So, okay. Now at this point, you check your ROs, you check both of them out, and now your 150 TDS goes down to 30, and now out of your system, you're getting 22 ppm. So, okay, your system is not purifying, and like we said before, 10 ppm, it's time for a resin change, and at that point, really, 10 ppm and under, you can clean windows. So if you're above 10 ppm, yeah, it's time for a filter change. So like I said, we checked our RO membranes, and we're at 30, and now it's only coming down to 22. And that tells me that your TDS issue is allocated to your DI housing. So, it tells me, okay, it's time for a resin change. Now let's say you just changed your resin, and you're getting this kind of result. It's important to understand the importance of the amount of resin in your cartridge. So did you fill the cartridge yourself, or did you buy a refilled cartridge? Did you take care in lubricating your seals? Did you make sure your seal is facing the right direction, i.e. your DI cartridge? Is the O-ring facing upwards? These are all things to consider. So, first of all, check your resin level. Make sure, if you've just changed it, that you have enough in there. Give it a couple taps, give it a nice shake. If you can feel the media moving around in there, if you can hear it at all, like a little shaker, it's time to throw more resin in there or change it out. If you just changed it, you can top it off. But if you've used it, dump all your media. Because at that point, if you mix new resin on top of old resin, you're gonna get a mixture of weird TDS results. You might get more TDS because you're getting the contact of absorbed TDS, and as water hits the resin bead, it's only limited to a contact kind of purification, which can allow the transfer of the particles that you don't want in your water to your water. So if it's in your resin chamber, change your resin. Now, if you're consistently changing your resin and you're finding that no matter what, after a little bit of usage, your system is shooting back up to 15 ppm or more, and you're confident that you have enough resin in your system, confident that your placement of your cartridge is correct, and you're confident that your seals are lubricated, it could be an indication that the issue is before the housing that you're looking at. So it's kind of like an elimination standpoint. If you know that this is okay, but you're consistently having to maintain this, it's an indication that your problem is actually beforehand and that your RO membranes aren't taking enough solids out of your water. So maintain your RO membranes so you can maintain the rest of your system. So now let's say hypothetically with that 150 TDS, you measure the output of your ROs and you get a result of 114 from 150. It's very clear that your membranes haven't done anything. So it's time for a change. Now, if you feel like it's premature for that change of your membranes, ask yourself this: how often was I changing my carbon filter? How harsh is my water? Are there any chloramines present in my water? If that's the case, then your pre-filter, you might want to consider a chloramine filter. Now, chloramines do not like membranes. Chloramines like to burn holes in membranes. They're not rated to deal with that kind of chemical. Now, chloramines are a chlorine-based chemical used to treat water, usually in municipal or city water. So it's damaging to your RO membranes. So if you live in an area that has that kind of water, which you could always look up to find out, you may want to consider changing your pre-filtration because the water is too damaging to your RO membranes. So bear that in mind when troubleshooting your TDS with your RO membranes. Now, what are some things that can cause TDS issues in your ROs? So we're going to talk about periods of non-usage and how that can affect your membranes. So let's say you only use this system once a month, a couple minutes. Maybe you're not using it very often. You have to understand that with any sort of situation where you have water inside a housing that is sitting, not traveling anywhere, that is a breeding ground for microorganisms. It's a breeding ground for microbial growth. Now, microbial growth occurs in stagnant water, and that will basically create these biofilms. You might see a loss in flow. You're definitely going to see some issues in filtration because you're getting spores of bacteria and everything in your fiberglass membranes. So, if you're not going to be using this system very often, first of all, use your RO Guardian if you're not going to use it for longer than 3 weeks. Just be safe. You don't want to create more problems down the line and have to change your most expensive filter just because you didn't take care of it. Another thing you can do is just run water through it every so often. You know, think of a car. You have a car that sits for too long, what's going to happen? It's not going to want to start. You got some strange issues. You're going to have to give it a tune-up. You're going to have to give it X, Y, and Z. But if you drove the car, once a week, allowed gas to travel through the system, allowed oil, your car's going to function and have a longer lifespan. If you think about your water-fed system kind of like that, well, think of long periods of stagnant water to be detrimental to your system versus flowing water. So we've talked about biofilms and microbial growth in regards to how long your system is sitting with stagnant water. So remember, just like a car that needs to run every so often and drive, if you're not going to use this system as often as you intend to. Whether you can run water maybe once a week just to get things moving, that's fine. Or if it's gonna sit for a long period of time, like more than 3 weeks, or 3 weeks, I should say, use your RO Guardian. Protect your membranes. And once again, on the subject of chloramine filters, again, chloramines do not like membranes. If you find that your membranes are rejecting lower than 80% of the TDS, then yes, there's something wrong with the membranes. It's either time for a change due to time, due to sitting, or if it's a relatively new system and either your water's not crazily harsh or you haven't necessarily had it for that long, but you're using it and maintaining your pre-filter changes, it might be an indication that chloramines are damaging your RO membranes. So make sure you research what kind of water you're dealing with in the area, because that'll tell you how your pre-filtration will protect your RO filtration. So now that we've touched upon TDS issues, we're going to talk about how to understand and diagnose any potential issues with flow. Okay, so now we're going to talk about any issues related to flow and trying to diagnose what could be the problem. So first and foremost, you have to understand that these systems function on the science of their filtration, and that filtration is made possible by the source water. Now, your source water is the water that you're using to supply water to your system, whether it's a garden hose at your client's house, whether it's a spigot from a commercial building, or a sink. Either way, your source is going to have a huge influence in how your system is going to perform. So, what are some factors at play here when trying to understand flow? So, the flow of water inside your filters is actually relative to the temperature that the water is. So, you have to understand that in colder months, right? Let's say beginning of spring, right? It's just coming out of winter, using water that is below the surface. Groundwater is going to be much colder during those transitional seasons, especially. So at that point, you're going to find that you're not going to get as much flow in those kind of months versus the warmer season. So much like wood, colder temperatures allows wood to kind of constrict while you have heat. The wood will expand. Well, think about water like that in your filters as such. You have fiberglass filters in these stainless steel housings. So if you're running very cold water in these housings that are not designed to freeze, by the way, at that point, you're going to have constriction. You're going to have less flow. So before identifying any issues, understand the quality of your water. Okay? You could also measure how many gallons per minute are coming out of that source spigot. You may find that depending on the location you're using the system, you may not have adequate source pressure. That's where a booster pump kind of comes in handy, because at that point you can compensate for the lack of pressure that you are getting from this particular job. And that's why you may see a change in performance going from location to location. So you can measure your GPM, your gallons per minute. So if you are getting a high GPM into your system, but you're running into flow issues where you're not really getting much of an output out of the system, but you know you're getting a strong source, okay, let's trace it. Ask yourself this. The first step in your system is your carbon filter. When was the last time you changed it? Like I mentioned in TDS issues, or maintenance rather, the carbon filter, when it needs changing, is also going to create a stoppage in flow. So at that point, change your carbon filter and see if you have any flow improvements. Chances are it's as simple as that. And then at that point, you can also measure the output of your membranes as far as gallons per minute versus your waste fitting. Now, I don't have any water running through this system. It's just hypothetical. So first and foremost, you have your waste fitting, and I have the output of the system here. So one thing you can identify trying to figure out what's going on with your flow is you want to see how your restrictors are performing. Now, your restrictors create back pressure to allow water to flow, pressurize, and purify, with that rejection coming out of this hose. Now, how that is made possible is through that fitting, it has a little restrictor piece inside. Now, as it's taking dissolved gook and garbage, you may find that that fitting itself is getting clogged up, which would result in kind of a lack of flow through this fitting. However, you would have an associated TDS issue along with that. So it's a good thing to understand how your flow restrictor is supposed to be functioning. Ideally, you want about a 4-to-1 ratio for pure water to 1 wastewater. So that being said, on the opposite spectrum, you may measure and find that you are getting way too much flow out of your waste restrictors and not adequate pure water flow. That means you're getting too much rejection, which could mean that your restrictor piece has failed and it's not restricting water. It's just allowing too much water to come through. That would also be associated with the TDS issue at that point, because really this filter wouldn't be performing as it should. So pay attention to your flow restrictors. So in regards to flow, we talked about temperature and how temperature affects your RO membranes. Again, I'm going to reiterate, the system is not designed to freeze. So if you find that you're going to use your system, perhaps it's a colder month, or it's just about to be the cold season, and you had a relatively frozen night, let's say temperatures hit freezing temperatures, but you kept your system in the van, and now you go to use your system, and you're getting a strange flow issue that you've never seen before. It's highly possible that the membranes inside, which are made of fiberglass that's wrapped and layered, have cracked, which means you're not getting proper flow inside, which you're going to have a whole bunch of issues at that point, which at that point I recommend changing all your filters anyway. So bear in mind, if your system has frozen and you're experiencing flow issues, your membranes are damaged and it's time for a change. Another thing you want to consider as far as trying to understand flow issues outside of the carbon filter and the RO membrane, you have your resin chamber here. And now resin is made up of beads. These resin beads that take out a charge from the water. They separate ions from the water. So if you imagine them like a marble, and the water molecule makes contact with this marble, now if this system has sat for a long time, that marble's going to get bigger. It's going to hit a point where it can't really do much. And if you decide to run water through this system that has sat for a while, well, because you have all those swollen resin beads that have absorbed and kind of hit a stasis where there's no exchange of ions, well, you're going to hit a stoppage in flow. Your beads are swollen, and your purification process has been limited to contact only because resin has expired at that point. So bear in mind, through usage of your system, resin kind of has like a self-cleaning effect. So as you're cycling water through, those ions are going to travel into the beads and kind of cycle through rather than getting locked into any biofilm from sitting too long. So just like you can experience microbial growth in your RO housings, you can experience that in your resin chamber. So I recommend, if your system has sat for a long period of time and you still have resin from your previous usage, change your resin. Do yourself the favor. That way you're not misdiagnosing and changing something else that you wouldn't necessarily need to change. Another thing to pay attention to as far as flow and your DI housing is making sure that your cartridge inside the housing is making a proper connection. Your seals are making proper seals. Because at that point, you don't want any water traveling where it shouldn't. And obviously that's going to result in either bad purification or an undesirable amount of flow. Flow is something that is highly relative to the water that you're provided with. So if you keep a booster pump handy, that'll prepare you for situations where you're going to have inadequate flow. So for the most well-rounded use of your system, keep a booster pump handy.